To the first meeting of the Corporate Governance Committee of 2025. Members, in addition to our usual arrangements to live stream the meeting, there's a possibility that a member of the public will attend and record the meeting in accordance with our published guidelines. Are there any apologies for absence?
Apologies from Councillor Burke, and Councillor Gray will be arriving a few moments late.
Thank you. Okay, let's move to agenda item 1, minutes of the previous meeting. Has everyone had a chance to look over the minutes of the previous meeting? And I'm happy that I signed the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of November 2024. Okay, on to item 2, members' interests. Do any members have any interest to declare in relation to any of the items on tonight's agenda? Brilliant. Let's move on to item 3, Community Governance Review, Glatton and Conington. I'd like to welcome Lisa Jablonska to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. For the benefit of members, members will recall you have seen the detail to this at your meeting in September. So just reminding you of that, so you had a bit of background information. So there's a request from Glatton Parish Council to review the parish boundaries between Glatton and Conington. So at your meeting, it was presented that Conington Parish Council are in opposition to this proposal. So as a result of that, you requested us to go back out to the parish councils to see whether they could trigger a community governance review by petition. So we received a valid petition. As the report said, a valid petition was received on the 12th of November. So by way of a valid petition, so when a petition area is less than 500 electors, so in this case we've got just over 400 electors combining those two parishes together. So the petition must be signed by 37.5% of the electorate. So in this instance, so a valid petition was submitted, and that equated to 54.6% of the electorate. So hence the reason why this report's in front of you. It's a valid petition was raised, so it means that we've got a report requesting you to consider undertaking a community governance review. The report sets out, it gives you the background in terms of reminding you of the boundaries that they're planning to amend. And the report sets out the timetable for implementation. So, subject to your decision tonight, members, if you are minded to approve the community governance review and progress to a public consultation exercise, so that review must be concluded within 12 months of its commencement as well. So, again. The report itself sets out the timeline in terms of proposed timeline in the appendices, and it will go out to consultation. So just referring back to Conington Parish Council again. So Conington Parish Council are still maintaining their view in terms of opposing the proposals to amend the parish council boundaries. So I have responded to them in that respect to say that obviously they will have an opportunity as part of the consultation process to submit these proposals, submit their views, and when and obviously any comments that come back to you as members will be presented back for you to consider. So at this stage, just to make the point that it's not in effect a done deal that there will be a reorganisation order that will conclude this process. It's just explaining the process and the proposal, and just looking to you for members to consider the recommendations and the recommendations set out in the executive summary. So, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Lisa. Does anyone have any comments or questions to ask? Councillor Jennings?
Thank you, Chair. I've been in contact with the member who covers Glatton and Conington, Councillor Alban, and he apologises he's not able to be here this evening with a matter of importance for his own ward. But he has asked me that if I wouldn't mind mentioning that he is continuing to take a neutral stance on this matter, and he'll work with whatever the outcome that the committee and any review comes up with. In terms of the paper itself, I think my position is we sat here before and we said we needed Glatton Parish to come back with a requisite number of signatures. They have, so for me, I don't think there's a lot further to discuss, that we should go ahead with the review.
Councillor Hodson-Jones.
Chair. I have a couple of questions because obviously Glatton Parish Council initiated this process long before the devolution white paper and local government review took place. So it's not linked to that unless they had some psychic powers. But obviously the local government review will have an impact on the combined parish if we were to approve a combined parish for the two parishes. And I just wondered if, as part of the review, we will be looking at both the the viability of the individual parishes and the viability of the combined parish, because I think that's quite pertinent in the context of the local government review.
Yeah, through you, Chair. I thought this might come up as a potential area of concern, and the intention will be, obviously we're still waiting for the final detail in terms of the local government reorganisation, in terms of the letter we're expecting obviously by the end of this week, really. So the intention will be that we will be organising some town and parish briefings on local government reorganisation. So that will obviously cover the higher level detail, but the proposal will be that we will plan some further town and parish council briefings in the autumn to look specifically at community governance reviews, because inevitably this will be the fallout from obviously the reorganisation, really. So I think, and at this stage, I think because we haven't got any more detail than obviously you as members have already been briefed on, I think, but the intention will be that we will do some further briefing. But again, if you are, so a request to you as members, if you're getting feedback from your towns and parishes, a request you to if you can email comms, and then we can update all the FAQs that we share with you as members, and we can, and obviously so all members are aware that if you're getting a steer from some of your parishes, we can make sure that we're maintaining the same message across all the brief.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? I have one, if you'll indulge me. Given the timescales detailed in the terms of reference, would any local elections have a bearing on the review at all?
In terms of, well, potentially, I mean, obviously, all town and parish councils have scheduled elections next year in May 26. So, having said that, in terms of the areas affected, I think in both areas, I think there are, you know, they're both within the same district wards anyway. So in terms of, it wouldn't make any difference to the scheduled elections.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? No? Okay, so for clarity, I'm going to read out the recommendations. Can I suggest that they're agreed on blocks? So essentially, we're voting for all three recommendations with one vote, by the way, a show of hands. Does everyone understand? Yep. So the committee has recommended to consider the request from Glatton Parish Council for a community governance review to review the parish boundary between Glatton and Conington, to approve the draft terms of reference of the review with or without amendment as detailed in Appendix A, and to authorise the Elections and Democratic Services Manager to agree a timescale in consultation with Glatton Parish Council and Conington Parish Council. Can all those in favour please raise your hands? That's unanimous, thank you. Let's crack on with item 4, the approval of the publication of the annual government statement 23-24 and annual financial report 23-24. Members, please refer to the supplement that was published after the initial agenda. Did everybody have a chance to look at the additional supplement? Yeah, thank you. So in that case, I'd like to welcome Suzanne and Sharon to introduce this item along with the representatives from Ernst & Young.
Thank you, Chairman, and through you. Committee will recall we did the previous set of accounts at the last meeting, so I wouldn't propose to give you more detail than that. Like I did last time, I'd like to pay credit to Sharon and the team for the enormous amount of work to get us to this point, working with our colleagues from Ernst & Young. In essence, we do the annual governance statement and the reports, but actually the main thing that you really need to do in agreeing to move forward on this is to hear from Ernst & Young on their report and to ask questions of them. I would suggest if there's any questions on the accounts between Sharon and myself, probably Sharon, will be able to pick those up. So with your permission, Chair, I suggest we invite Claire.
Thank you. So we've attached here our audit results report, which summarises the findings from our audit on the 23-24 financial statements. And again, we'd like to pass thanks to Sharon and the team because this is a really well progressed audit for 23-24 and been really supportive in helping us get through our audit procedures. On page, I'm trying to find the report. Page 8 of our report, we set out the areas of outstanding audit work. We are awaiting receipt of assurances from the audit of the Cambridgeshire County Council Pension Fund, which feeds into our work on your local government pension scheme numbers. And we're expecting that by the end of this week. So that's really positive. We should get that soon. There are some final elements of senior manager and partner review to go through. Nothing that we're expecting would necessarily amend the accounts. If there is anything crops up, obviously we'll speak to Sharon and Suzanne, but it's largely progressed. We haven't identified any further material issues at that time. We'll agree the final set of financial statements, subsequent events reviews and receive signed management representation letters. We're not, as I was explaining to Sharon earlier, able to sign today predominantly because we don't have the format of our opinions ready, given that they're quite different because of the 22-23 disclaimers, but hopefully we'll have a form of words next week, which I can share with Suzanne and Sharon once you've agreed the arrangements for the accounts. So I think accounts, were really good. We've set out on page 9, just summarises the audit differences. Again, especially considering there wasn't an audit in 22-23, I'd say that's quite clean. There was one adjustment in terms of an income 1.1 million, which management have made, and some estimation differences around property, plant and equipment, which is not unusual because it is an estimate and by far one of the biggest estimates in the accounts. So that's there. I guess the main area to draw attention to the committee is in terms of our value for money conclusion, where we consider the economy, efficiency and effectiveness of the use of resources of the council. And you will see in the report that based on the external reviews that the council had reported at the last committee meeting of the Internal Audit Service, we are suggesting that we're going to report a significant weakness in arrangements, in our opinion, in respect to the governance arrangements, because for the 23-24 financial year, the Internal Audit Service was perhaps not operating as it should have been. In this report, we do recognise that management have taken forward a lot of work in 24-25, and we'll look at that as we come through our 24-25 audit plan and in 24-25 audit cycle as well, and reflect any progress in that. Really, I'm happy just to take questions from the members on any element of the report.
Thank you. Is there any questions or comments from the panel? Councillor Taylor.
Hi. So on page 31 of the report, there's, so I'm just getting it myself. That's 37. Yeah, there it is. You highlighted a 1.15 million overstatement of income due to incorrect coding received by the Department of Work and Pensions. How did that affect us?
I think that was just a miscoding in the ledger. So yeah, that was adjusted, and I think what we're saying is that in the initial draft accounts, the income was overstated by 1.15 million. In this amended version, that's been adjusted for, and the income has been reduced. So that's adjusted, but just given the size of the adjustment, we're required to report to you as those charged with governance, but that's all been addressed.
So again, there was no real impact. It was just a wrong coding, and that's what you've highlighted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. And I think I'll add my thanks to everybody for getting the accounts done So quickly round again, but it feels like we're getting back on track, which is really good. And thanks to everybody in the team. I guess my question really is actually about a number on the accounts, and it's not so much the number itself, but more the process that happens behind it. Insofar that when we saw, or when I think the Performance and Growth panel looked at the Q4 provisional outturn, the underspend / over recruitment of things was looking at about 1.7 million, and in the outturn report, in the financial report, it looks like it's 4 or 5 million now. But I couldn't see anywhere easily where this was being highlighted about what has caused that difference from the time that the draft numbers came out, and what the process is if there's a material change between the draft numbers and the final numbers, both in, because I'm looking more at the governance side here really, but what the processes are internally with officers and also with the Executive Councillor and other members.
Through you, Chair, I think what you're referring to there is you're talking about this year's budget and the proposed outturn for this year. These accounts for the previous year. So you're talking about 2 different years, Councillor Jennings. So these accounts are for 23-24, not for 24-25. So the figures that came to, for the proposed outturn for Q4 reflect where we expect to be at the end of March this year, and these accounts are for the year previous, which is why you'll see different figures.
Sorry, I was referring back to, these would have been with your predecessor, the Q4 figures, the Q4 outturn figures for 23-24.
In respect of those, clearly that's the budget figures, and that's effectively your management accounting figures. So where we expect to be in terms of against the budget. What you then see here is how we've accounted for those things. So the way in which those are compiled are different, because that gives you the cash position. What's stated in here is how the income and that is paid out, but I think Sharon can add a bit more to that.
Yeah, I think what we're looking at is the provisional outturn is purely income and expenditure that relates to particular services, whereas the year-end report incorporates things such as depreciation, revaluation of properties, which aren't within the provisional outturn report. So there are a lot of accounting transactions that happen in the year in the statement of accounts that don't appear in the provisional outturn report because they're not monetary. We don't account for depreciation revaluations in the budget. We don't account for them in the service outturn report, but they have to be accounted for obviously in the statement of accounts and then removed via the MERS to get technical.
Go for it.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. So is the big movement down to revaluation then, because it clearly it's going in the wrong way to be depreciation. And it's all in corporate services department.
I'll come back to you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? No. So as with the last item, for clarity, I'm going to read out the recommendations. And again, I suggest these are agreed on block. So this time you're voting for all 5 recommendations with 1 vote by way of show of hands. Everyone happy with that? Yep. So the committee has recommended 2, receive and discuss the completion report for those charged with governance 23-24, which is Appendix 1. Approve the annual governance statement, Appendix 2, and authorise the executive leader and chief executive officer to sign the statement on behalf of the council. Approve the letter of representation, Appendix 3, and authorise the corporate director, finance and resources, as Section 151 officer, to sign it on behalf of the council. To give delegated powers to the chairman of the committee and corporate director, finance and resources, as Section 15 officer, to authorise and sign the annual financial accounts for 23-24 Appendix 4 on behalf of the council, and give delegated powers to the corporate director of finance and resource in conjunction with the chairman of this committee to ensure that any minor amendments to the statement of accounts are completed before the final publication. Catch my breath. So can all those in favour of the recommendation please raise your hand? Lovely, it's unanimous again. Thank you. So let's move on to item 5, the local audit strategy update. Suzanne, will you please introduce this item?
Thank you very much, Chair. I brought this item to the committee's attention just to provide an update with the plans for assuring that local audit actually catches itself back up. And there has been a consultation which actually closed today. So I've set out for you what the strategy is, and I know that Claire through EY has been involved in it through the firms and through the Society of District Council Treasurers. I've fed back into the consultation response on behalf of District Council Treasurers. This is all part of the work being done to recover the system and make sure that it doesn't recur, which is obviously the most important thing, and proposition of a new body. So it's really just to provide you with some assurance that there is work going on, the timetable for it, and that the government department is taking it seriously in terms of providing that reassurance. And I would say that there is really good engagement from all partners across the system. So happy to take any comments, but clearly I won't be able to feed them back into the consultations. It closed today. So apologies for that date, but I can assure you that I do know that full responses have gone in. And as I say, a clear will to want to work together across the sector to actually get to a positive situation and back to where we were.
Thank you, Suzanne. Anyone wish to make comments or ask any questions on this item? Lovely. So for this item, the committee is recommended to note the contents of the report, making any comments on the proposed approach. I think we've done that, although there was no comments. So let's move on to the next item, which is item 6, the corporate risk register. Back to you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Chair. You'll recall at the committee last time I asked for you to give me a little time to revamp our approach to corporate risk. I advised you that I had invited RSM, who provide the system, to come and give us some strategic support with that. And what you're seeing before you here is in Appendix 1, the plan that is being worked through to bring us up to speed, including bringing it to yourselves. And so far, we sent a questionnaire out to service managers to ask them to take a fresh look at the sorts of things that they thought should be high on the Council's corporate risk register. And the list in Appendix 2 are the 18 emerging themes on which we're now starting to develop further work. I can report that we had a satisfactory move to the new version of the system last week, which is really positive, and that in doing this work, Craig from RSM has then gone back across that very long list that you previously had to make sure that there were no glaring errors, and also done some benchmarking for us against other district councils of our type to make sure that we hadn't not covered anything off. So I'm bringing this to the committee, A, to demonstrate that we are making progress, but also if there were other thoughts on the emerging corporate risks that you would like senior leadership team, when they do their work on Friday, to consider those, then we'd be happy to take those back, because it's management's risk register which we bring to you for assurance that we are actually taking good regard to the risks. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if I missed this because I wasn't at the last meeting, but is this not in replacement of risk and controls officer that you haven't recruited? Is that right? Or this is just a short term to get you back into the...
Happy to take that question. We didn't succeed in recruiting, so given that felt there was a lot of work to do, including the system revamp, took a short-term approach to bring in some external facilitation to get us to that point. And I'm just considering actually how I go out to recruit for that post to make sure it's what we need and that it's placed in the right area of the organisation as well. So coming in new, Philip, I've taken a view about that, and then I will go to recruit. I may decide to consider and recommend to SLT, we have a bit of a hybrid model there. We have someone internally making sure that we're doing the work, but actually using some oversight, strategic oversight as well, to make sure that we stay abreast of where we need to be and maximise the use of the system. So I'm still considering the options on that, but we have got suitable resource at the moment to help us through.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? Councillor Taylor.
Okay, thank you. I've never come across this term. What's a straw man?
That is basically something for discussion. So straw man is let's start from somewhere, and so it's the sort of draft proposal. So that's the definition that I know of the term, and that's the draft here. So it's one for discussion rather than a finished product.
Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the 18 emerging corporate risks, presumably these were RSM were leading on the identification of those, or is it a collaborative effort between the council and RSM? Thank you.
It was actually what our senior managers and management team have actually put together. So what RSM did for us was to collate them, because clearly there were more responses than this. So they grouped them because people framed them differently. But this is actually, we asked the officer corps to do that. So our management teams are going down within the organisation because we know our business best. And then, as I say, we asked for that strategic challenge, and I asked the question, have we missed anything that other district councils haven't done? And have we missed any major categories that were on the previous list that was very detailed and difficult to find our way through? So they facilitated it. This is still the work of the council officers.
Thank you. Any more? Councillor Jones, Hodgson Jones.
Thank you. I noticed a reference to risk owners as well as risk managers. Will the new risk register identify who the risk owners, and would it be identifying them by role rather than by name?
Yes, that's very much my preferred style, because the risk owner should be a role, not an individual, because people move jobs and people move on. So the first stage that we're doing is identifying the risk owners for each of these, which I expect to be at the senior leadership level. But then who owns the controls and manages the mitigations will be elsewhere in the organisation, heads of service, for example. But actually that ownership should be at that very senior level and should remain with the post. And that's the way in which we're framing it. So the next time you see this, you will see more of that. So our intention is that for March, we'll be able to bring you the next iteration of this. You'll see who the risk owners are. We won't have got all the controls nailed. We won't have got all the system uploaded. But that is absolutely where we want to be.
Thank you. And will we then eventually be able to see what each individual risk owner is doing to manage and mitigate the risks that are within their purview? And then quite separately, who will be responsible for controlling that the assessment of risk and the classification of the likelihood and impact is consistent across the organisation?
That will be part of the role of the risk control officer that we go out and recruit. But in the short term, we'll have some of that assurance through RSM, because they will challenge us on that to get the consistency. Hence why they will go through with each of the risk owners and bring that up to speed. So my intention is that senior leadership team meet to consider governance once a month, and that's where we will do that senior level review. And that the risk control officer will make sure that risks are being reviewed, that people have done their updates in the system. So that's how we will get that level of consistency. And that may also be part of the role that we consider whether or not we want to continue with the strategic overview work that RSM do for other district councils, to make sure that they're also helping us to challenge our thinking on that.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for being late. Firstly, can I say this is very positive. I particularly liked the direction of travel you provided in the first document that was there. It's always good to have a timeline, and the key activities that I can see outlined there are the ones I would expect to see. So thank you very much for that. With regards to emerging risks, it's captured under 8, unable to meet requirements of new regulations and legislation affecting the council. But I'm sure very much on your mind are the new procurement regulations that are now less than a month away from landing in this authority. And we do spend a lot of money, and making sure that we spend it in accordance with the regulations is important. One of the 18 one emerging risk that I think I would like you to reflect on where you think it should sit is that we are clearly going to face local government reorganisation. And I couldn't, as I looked down the risk themes, see that it sat sort of neatly in any of the themes that were there. And yet I feel that it's going to be dominating our thoughts and our actions and our activities, whether we like it or not, for the years ahead.
Through you, Chair, if I may say, this work was actually done just prior to the announcement of the white paper. So quite clearly, that is well and truly on our agenda. It would be wrong if it wasn't on most councils' agenda. So yes, I absolutely see that, and I think we'll come back to the procurement regulations because I provided some information on that as part of another update, and I'll talk through that in a little while. So happy to take that one away, and I think that is absolutely something that it's occupying a lot of our time, so undoubtedly it must be there.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Hodgson-Jones.
Yes, sorry, just to say that on that point, I think that it actually touches quite a few of the items on your emerging risks. I'm looking particularly at 13, 14 and 16, and there may be others as well, but and I suspect that it's going to have an indirect impact on 12.
Thank you for that. I think your observations are well made, and when we do our further work ongoing from this, clearly that will be at the forefront of our mind as well. So thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to possibly suggest something to add to this, the use of AI in the council potentially. I think there perhaps needs to be robust procedures and rules about what officers, councillors, employees can use AI for and what data can be put into it. I don't know if that's something worth considering.
Chair, if I may say, in fact, we do have a policy on AI, and it was updated recently by the Information Governance Board shared by the 3 councils. And that is something that the IT team continue to look at and consider which ones are appropriate and which ones should be blocked from use. Clearly, this is at the high level of corporate. It does feed into security as well. So that absolutely is on our purview, and we already have a policy in place.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? Mr.
Thank you,
Webb?
Chair. I was just going to ask, the impact of 4 risk usage, is that, I'm just reading through the provide system admin training for purposes ensuring risk, 4 risk maintenance, etc. Do you think that's going to reduce the, perhaps or define the job description of the risk control officer?
Through you, Chair. Yes, indeed, that is something that we do need to look at, and we were on an older version of 4 risk, which meant we weren't able to easily update risks, which we discovered and which RSM found by looking at our system. So part of rolling out the training in terms of how we assess risk and controls and that sort of stuff will be to make sure that people are fully up to speed with that system, and that will be an area where the risk and control officer will make sure that we remain up to speed and be there to support in the initial stages users, and then clearly we'll have the backup from RSM because that's part of their provision of the system that's always been there. So indeed that will be the case.
Anyone else? No? So the committee is recommended to consider the approach proposed and the emerging content of the Corporate Risk Register and the strategy for future development risk management. I think we've done that. So we'll move on to item 7 on the agenda, the internal audit update report. Suzanne, this is back to you with support from Daniel Harris from RSM. We'll also be stepping into support on this item.
Actually, my job is really to introduce Dan to you. I have the responsibility as a Section 151 officer to make sure we have a sufficient provision of internal audit and that regular reports come to this committee. And so at the beginning of January, I asked RSM to come in and provide us with some immediate support because that was our requirement. So I really need to pass over to Dan as our head of audit in that capacity at the moment, fulfilling that role for us, not as an employee, but fulfilling that role, to provide you with his update on internal audit.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. What I thought I would do is take a little bit more time because it's the first time that we put sort of this progress report together for you, just to sort of bring the paper alive a little bit. But just to introduce, you should have a progress report on each and every meeting, I think, from your internal audit team. Typically a twofold purpose of that report. One is to say to you, this is where we're at in terms of the delivery of the programme of work that you've agreed and approved. And secondly, are there any significant issues coming out of our work that might impact the year-end opinion and then potentially flow through to the annual governance statement. So apologies if I'm sort of saying the basics, but I think it's just sort of important to reiterate that that's the purpose of this paper. So Suzanne's quite right. We were sort of beginning of January asked to come in really and sort of provide a bit of a status update on where the in-house team were in terms of delivery of the programme. So in addition to that, we looked at what we might be able to deliver in terms of 24/5 remaining audits, also assist in the preparation of a plan for 25/6, which obviously is a agenda item tonight as well. So we've obviously met with the in-house team, a range of officers and members ahead of this meeting and ahead of pulling the paper together. So you can see on page 177 of the pack, the key messages section, so sort of page 3, small page 3 of my report. This is the update position. So no final reports in terms of the 24/5 plan have been issued since the last meeting. 4 final reports have been issued year to date. So obviously we're 10 months into the year, so not a significant amount of final reports issued year to date. 4 further reports are issued in draft, so they're in circulation. We're working with officers to finalise the status of those reports. So certainly my intention would be by your March meeting, those 4 reviews would be finalised. So if I can then take you to page 181 or page 7, so that's Appendix A of my report. What we've then done, that's a list of all of the audits that were originally agreed in the programme of work. So you can see within that list that there are 6 deferrals that have been proposed through to 25/6 from the current year's plan. Now, some of those have been deferred from the previous financial year as well, so they've been sort of knocked back 2 financial years. 7 audits have not commenced, and 5 of those were IT-related audits, which I think the in-house team has historically or were intending in 24/5 to use an external provider to deliver, and 2 reviews are currently in progress. And then I've just sort of tried to show that in a slightly different way in Appendix B, just to sort of tidy that up so that you can see sort of Section 1 there. There's the 6 that have been deferred from prior year. There's the reviews that have not yet commenced that were of a specialist nature, sort of IT typically. And then what I've agreed in the interim, so I had some discussions with Suzanne in terms of the options that were available in terms of 24/5. Now, we would have had to have undertaken a significant number of audits in the final 2 months of the year. Also, given, I think, a paper that came to your last committee meeting, it did draw some question marks around compliance with the public sector internal audit standards. So in effect, Sorry, and one further point. I believe that in the prior sort of 3 years, you've had limitation of scope opinions put on the annual opinion by the previous heads of internal audit. So we felt that pragmatically what we needed to do was be in a position, rather than sort of try and flood 8, 9, 10 reviews in the last 2 months of the financial year, we've agreed that we will be undertaking a cyber essentials review. I think that's important, given that's a sort of a shared service provision around your IT provision. So we will be coming in over the next 2 months to deliver a cyber essentials review. We will also be coming in and delivering, you're coming on to that paper whereby management have provided an update on progress against actions and recommendations that have been agreed previously. What we're going to do over the next couple of months is come in independently and say, yes, we're satisfied, we can see evidence that those actions have indeed been implemented. So that the bottom of that table there on page 9 of my report says there's the 2 reviews that we will be undertaking between now and the year end. I've referenced already the commentary that I've got within the report around compliance or indeed lack of compliance with the public sector internal audit standards in 24/5. And therefore the section there where I'm saying in terms of the annual report, it's my view that we will have to place a limitation around all 3 areas of risk management, governance and internal control for the financial year 24/25. In terms of the positive and the next paper I'm coming on to, it's fully envisaged that in 25/6 there will be a risk-based internal audit plan that will come through to your March meeting for your consideration and input, that we will work with the in-house team to deliver reviews that will be public sector internal audit standards, indeed along with the new global internal audit standards that have come in from the 1st of January. So in 25/6 it's very much the intention that there will be a programme of work delivered that will allow an opinion to be given at the year end on the risk management, governance and internal control arrangements. Sorry, I appreciate I've sort of hit you with quite a bit, but I thought that was worthwhile just explaining a little bit more than I sort of ordinarily I would take a paper as read, but I think it's important to sort of reiterate the position that we find ourselves in. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the explanation. Is there any questions or comments? Councillor Hodgson-Jones.
Thank you. My first question is in relation to the reports where you say to commence February, March 2024. I presume you mean 2025, and that's just a typo. But that applies to development management and review of asset management records. But the wider question I have is there are 23 assignments on there, and it looks as though we're only going to get about 8, 9, maybe 10 reports completed in this year. Is that correct?
Sorry, the first point was correct. It should read 25. So in effect, I think what we're saying is, so there's 4 finals already year to date. There's 4 out in draft. So assuming we get those finalised, that will be 8. There's 2 reviews in progress by the in-house team, so that will be 10. And then we are proposing to deliver a further 2 reviews before the end of the year. So that will be, in effect, sort of half the plan, the original plan that was approved actually being delivered by the year end. Hence the proposed limitation of scope that will come through in the annual report that I issue at the end of the financial year.
And what's the underlying reason for this being so far behind schedule?
From what I can tell, it's I think there's been various vacancies during the financial year at that head of internal audit level, that internal audit manager level, and I think there's been another vacant post within the team.
So if I may, how confident are you that you can get back on track? Because what you're telling me is that there are a number of final reports. There are reports in draft which can be finalised, and there's two in field work and 2 to commence. And you're telling me that those 4 reports are going to be completed in the next 2.5 months, next 2 months, because we're now pretty much at the end of January. And yet, in the first 10 months, we have not completed 5 times 2.
Well, I think that's correct. What I would say is that I'm very confident in, just in terms of giving you a brief bit of background in terms of RSM's internal audit capabilities. We've got 220 pure internal audit staff on a national basis. I work out of our sort of Milton Keynes, Cambridge and Chelmsford offices. I've got a team of 50 internal auditors that help our clients with sort of fully outsourced or indeed co-sourced arrangements. So I can provide assurance that we have got the resource within the firm to deliver the 2 reviews that I've talked about. We are now providing the oversight, supervision and management of the 2 part-time in-house members of the staff to enable them to complete the remaining work. So I think as things stand at the end of January, I'm confident that we can deliver the 12 reviews in totality that I've referenced. And then obviously once we understand what the 25-6 plan is, I think it's a fair challenge that you should seek assurance from me again that we're confident that we can deliver 25-6 programme of work. But perhaps one thing at a time, it's the assurance tonight that I'm confident we can deliver those 12 audits, which appreciating that sort of half the original programme, but I can give you that assurance this evening.
Through you, Chair, if I may add, Councillor Hodgson-Jones, clearly it's my responsibility to ensure we've got sufficiency of audit, as I've said earlier, and that was in fact one of the questions I asked when I contacted RSM, if they had the capacity to be able to do as much as we possibly can. Regrettably, I can't turn the clock back and I can't pick up all of what's being or can't have it picked up. We also need to recognise we wouldn't have the capacity internally to provide the information to do a further 8 or 9 reviews. So on that basis, I have spoken with my colleagues, statutory officers, and said we need to do as much as we possibly can, but that was indeed one of the questions. And if I had any doubt that RSM could have provided in as much support as possible over the remaining part of the year, and obviously a lot's been done during this current calendar month, I would not have invited them to step straight in and do this work. So I did do some due diligence before I did that.
Thank you, but what I'd like to see is that when the 25-26 plan comes to us, that it is realistic about the amount of work that will be completed, and if in the normal course of events there are 2023, 24 reviews and we're carrying about 10 forward, then clearly we're not going to complete 30 plus reviews in 25-26, and therefore what I expect to see is for the 25-26 audit plan, first of all, a realistic number of reports to be delivered, but also a prioritisation of the existing list of reports and deferred reports, so that we can ensure that just because something's been held over from 24-25 to 25-26 doesn't necessarily mean that it's more important than something that would have been undertaken in 25-26.
If I might suggest through you, Chair, I think we'll come to that in the next paper, because clearly that's a view that I have discussed with Dan. So I think we will give you some assurance on that in the next item.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
If I could just make a comment before I ask my question. I mean, Dan, thank you very much for the presentation, which you seem to be making the best of a bad fist. I think it's probably the best way of describing this. And Suzanne, I'm heartened by the conversations that we've had both in this panel and you and I have had externally, that we are going in the right direction. But I don't think what we've heard this evening is very unsatisfactory. It reflects very badly on us as an authority. I don't think internal audit has ever been held in high esteem, in all my years here in HDC, and perhaps it was ever thus for internal audit in whichever sector of the world you find, of the workplace you find yourself. But there's been, there's clearly been a ball dropped very heavily here. And I think we've got two executive councillors here that need to reflect on, how did this happen? How was it allowed to happen? And how are we going to make sure that, well, I'm fairly certain it won't happen again, given the determination that's being displayed. But I don't think we can just kind of pretend that 24, 25 is just kind of like a bit unfortunate. And as a corporate governance panel, through you, Chair, I think we should be expressing that view. My question, to move on to that, given that we've got our statutory auditors here, and given that our statutory auditors look to our internal auditors for assurances about how we do things, what impact is that going to have on the 24-25 accounts? And how how are you going to respond to the statements that have just been made and the lack of action, frankly, that's taken place during the course of the year when you come to do your audit work on the financial year that we're talking about now?
Thank you. So in terms of the actual financial statements and the numbers, actually audit and standards don't allow us to rely on the work of internal audit as we used to many years ago. So it probably won't make too much of a difference in terms of the financial statements and the audit of the numbers. We will consider the overall control environment, as you always do, in terms of assessing risk and the level of risk of material misstatement. Where it is most likely to impact, as we've reported today, that we've got the value for money significant weakness in relation to the internal audit arrangements for 23-24. I expect, given the conversations we've had to date and what we've heard at committee today, that we might have similar falling into 24-25 again. But, we'll have that as we start doing the detailed work. I'll liaise closely with Dan and Suzanne and we'll come to that. But I think that's where it's most likely to impact, is the value for money significant weaknesses again next year.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? Councillor Wells?
Thank you, Chair. This is probably maybe my lack of understanding, but a question for yourself, sir. I was interested in the focus on the IT control cyber assessment essentials internal audit, given that obviously we have a shared service, IT service across Huntingdonshire, Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire. So I just wondered why we, as Huntingdonshire, will be focusing on that particularly. Thank you.
I think the issue there for us was that because there had initially been 5 different IT audit reviews scheduled in the original 24/5 programme, and none of those have so far taken place to date. Noting the point that Suzanne made in terms of sort of trying to then all in one 2-month period do 4 or 5 different reviews in the same area, we felt that if we used the Cyber Essentials framework, that gives quite a good baseline. So what it requires officers to do is do a self-assessment of where they believe they are against the government's sort of 10 steps, and then we would in effect come in and say, right, prove it. Let's see the evidence. We'll then make our own assessment against the IT team's self-assessment. So we felt that would be quite an appropriate way, without flooding that team with too many audits in a very short space of time, to give indeed officers and indeed this committee with some level of assurance around the sort of the IT and cyber environment.
If I may add through you, Chair, we host the service, so it's important that we do that. And obviously, despite the fact it's a shared service, we've got responsibility to this council. So it is important that we do that irrespective of how the service is provided. So I think that's important to us.
I have a question, if I may. Of the 4 reports mentioned as finalised reviews on page 3 of your report, or page 177 of the reports pack, the Disabled Facilities Grant verification is the only one without original or target date. I'm sure I've probably missed something, but I was just wondering why there's no dates that's on item 14 on Appendix A.
I think I might be able to help with that, Chair. The Disabled Facilities Grant verification is the verification of a grant rather than an audit, and that's why there's not a date. It's a task that's done when the grant is available to be verified. So it's not an audit per se, it's the verification of a grant claim.
Thank you. So it's ready to go when the... Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Philip Webb?
Thank you, Chair. It may be just a presentation issue, but in Appendix A, which is listing all the progress against internal, is there something behind this, as in a Gantt chart or progress or a weighting against each one of these assignments? Because it just purely looking at it, it's quite difficult to see, you know, what's important and what isn't, and what has already been done and what hasn't. And although there is a RAG rating, it doesn't seem to be complete. So I assume you may say this is quite normal, but I'm just looking at it from perhaps a layman's point of view. I would have some sort of Gantt chart behind this.
Yes, thank you, Councillor, for your question. What I would say is that in relation to the sort of the RAG rating, because only 4 reports have been finalised, what we don't do at a draft report stage is put a RAG rating against that report, because in effect we're still in discussions with the audit sponsors. There might be some sort of disagreement around findings or some additional evidence that can be provided. So hence, it's only a RAG rating that we would put in here. And indeed, in terms of the third column, the sort of opinion issued. So you can see a couple of reasonable assurance opinions in there again. We would only show that when a report gets to a final status. So what I would ordinarily hope at sort of 10 months into the financial year is this would be a lot more populated with more final reports and therefore sort of more RAG rating descriptions. But for the reasons explained, we're in a position where only 4 reviews have year to date been finalised. So that's why all of the sections aren't completed in the table.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I assume, though, that then not all these are going to tie up resources in equal measure. So I just wondered if there was some sort of weighting against each one, just to give us an idea of what sort of mountain there is to climb.
I'm happy to help with that question if through you, Chair. In essence, this is the plan for the current year, not formulated by RSM. This is their reporting back as to where it is. So this was the list of the audits that were intended for this year's audit plan in a plan that was presented to this committee at the beginning of the cycle. I think it was actually came forward in May. So this was all the list of items that were to be done. And I think what will be described to you in the next report is how actually the prioritisation is going to be done, which is how I answered Councillor Hodgson-Jones earlier. So in essence, I think we're not saying that everything on this list is going to be done, and what wasn't deferred from this year into next year will be considered by Dan as the head of internal audit as to where the priorities are, and we'll talk a bit about that in the next item. So this is just recognising this was what was in the plan and a report of what's been achieved in year. So it's the detail behind the summary that Dan gave you.
Anybody else? No, thank you. So it's recommended that the committee comment on and note the update on work undertaken in internal audit in December 24 and January 25, and I think we've done that. So we'll move on to item 8 on the agenda. Preparation of internal audit plan for 25-26. I believe this is Suzanne and Daniel again.
Well, it's Dan's proposed long list, which I'm sure he'll talk you through. For my part, as a member of corporate leadership team, I've already been asking my colleagues on here to look at this in terms of the long list so that we can have that interactive conversation with RSM as to the prioritisation, including what's left over. So with that, I'll ask Dan to share more of his rationale for having put this long list together.
Thank you, Suzanne, Chair. So if I may, I think the first thing I would be open and honest to admit, so we only signed a letter of engagement about 3 or 4 days before your paper deadline. So this was very much, and still very much is, a work in progress. And I think one of the comments that I've heard this evening quite rightly around, for example, on the risk register and the new Procurement Act, it may not be lost on you that we haven't, I immediately looked through that when that comment was made. So there's a contract management review stated in there, and I think indeed one of the new requirements under that new act is a lot more prescriptive requirements around contract management. So absolutely contract management would be potentially an appropriate audit, but I'll be honest that I've omitted the fact that procurement should be considered in that long list, but I apologise, but only so far as it's still very much work in progress. What we wanted to do was just get something in front of the committee this evening to say, look, there's a range of things that we've already considered. So we've considered the audit areas that have been deferred from 24/5, so that sits at the top of the table. We've then looked at potential areas of audit in terms of the finance reviews, and there's obviously a raft of areas that could be considered. We've then gone on to people reviews. We've then talked about core assurance reviews. There's some IT audit coverage potentially, and then some other coverage. The one thing that wasn't ready for us to consider in time for preparing this paper was the updated risk register. Now, clearly, any internal audit programme should be driven by and linked to risks that officers and members feel that the council faces might stop you from achieving your objectives. So clearly, what we need to do, I think, is get some fairly early assurance that indeed the new risk refresh that's been put in place can be relied upon. But what we will also do, that doesn't preclude us from having discussions with officers and saying, these are important areas. So, for example, payroll, if payroll had not been subject of an internal audit for 2 or 3 years, clearly that would be something that we would want to put forward as a priority area, given the value of spend. I'm not saying it is, but I'm just giving you a sort of a feel for some of the discussions we'd be having. So clearly, what I undertook to do with colleagues was put together a long list, which I'm sure will still be added to over the coming weeks. We're attending an SLT meeting on Friday to discuss this in a bit more detail with senior officers across the council, with a view to shaping, and the point that was just made, just because something has been deferred for 2 financial years doesn't mean that it necessarily automatically goes in the 25/6 programme. There needs to be some rationale in terms of, is it a high priority area, is it a high risk area? I come back to another councillor comment tonight. Absolutely, we need to, in the programme that comes through to your March meeting, demonstrate, for example, if we're to deliver 20 reviews, how are they going to be spread out across the quarters? When do we intend to bring sort of final reports so that you get a smooth delivery of final reports, rather than having 15 right at the end of the financial year to one meeting. So we will try and do exactly that in the paper that comes through to your next meeting. But really the whole purpose of this paper was just really to sort of put something down to say there's a methodology that underpins the approach that we will take towards drafting the 25/6 strategy. And at section 2.1, I think that was the final point that I would make. What we have done is, in that sort of short space of time, we've pulled together an analysis, a backward-looking analysis from the last 3 or 4 years of the areas that have been subject to internal audit coverage and the assurance opinion that's been provided. And then again, we will bring an updated version of that document. Typically, the ticks that we've got in there for future years will move around when we've had the sort of chance to discuss further with officers and do a little bit more analysis of your risk registers and so on, in terms of the priority of the years when that coverage would be proposed. So I think that's all I can say, but I think it was important at this stage to say, yes, okay, the last paper was all about a little bit of a backward look in terms of the 24/5 programme, but this hopefully gives you the committee sight of and some confidence that we're very much sort of looking to bring a plan, and it's in the process of being developed to your March meeting.
Thank you both. Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm quite reassured, actually, because I think one of my concerns was that you were going to be hamstrung by having half your work already be decided because it was stuff that hadn't been completed and that the previous internal audit manager had deferred for one reason or another. So I think it'd be good to have a refreshing look from somebody from outside who's got, significant amount of experience to come and challenge perhaps what some of the internal requests are going to be for internal audit, if you'll forgive the pun. So I think that's quite handy. I have one question really about how your reports are going to look when they come back to this panel. And I note that in 2.1, and the terminology of what type of assurances keeps changing every few years. So I'm assuming that we're now, it's reasonable, limited and negative. Are they the three types of assurance that you get? And if so, what colours are being used to represent this? Because it seems like the reasonable ones are being given an amber colour and limited the red. And I'm just wondering how is there a colour that's even worse than red? And is there no colour that's grey? It feels to me like this is sort of one iteration down from sort of risk audit reports I've seen before.
So what might be helpful is in our next meeting for us to just put a one-pager in there that shows you so we actually issue 4 different assurance opinions. 2 of those are positive, 2 of those are negative. So you've got a substantial and a reasonable depicted by typically sort of green and amber. So good news, i.e. positive. And then we've got a partial and a limited assurance, which is orange, and then red in terms of negative opinions. But I think it's a valid comment to say the committee needs to understand what those assurance opinions are, and we'll incorporate that within the paper that comes through to March.
Councillor Hodgson-Jones.
Thank you. I was just looking at your assurance map going forward. There are certainly more areas here than you could possibly cover in a single year. And even if you had, even if you were fully on board to do 20 odd reviews a year, you would take 2 years to cover this lot. And some areas, because they are core and because they're high risk, need to be covered annually, such as revenues and benefits and the like. When you come back with the next iteration of this paper, I think it would be really helpful to have a version of this map which shows what are the areas that must be done in 25-26 and what are the areas that ought to be done but we could live with them being deferred, and which are the areas that are going to be deferred. Because whilst it may be possible to defer some items for 1 year or even 2 years, if you keep deferring them because they're not very important, they will become important because the risk of something going wrong is obviously rising each time you don't review them.
So I would agree with all of that. I mean, I think typically what I would add is that we would typically have a sort of a 3 to 5 year strategy. I mean, clearly the one thing I would say is that a plan may be agreed in a March meeting. It should be kept under review in year. So there may be emerging risks. So there may be a need to substitute certain coverage. I think the other important point that, again, we just didn't have time to sort of look at in terms of preparing this, there are other sources of assurance that the authority will have that ICO reports or health and safety specialists that you might commission. So clearly what we wouldn't be looking to do is duplicate that assurance. So if you're commissioning something from a health and safety specialist, you may not see a significant amount of health and safety work planned through an internal audit plan if we can rely on other sources of assurance, or as your risk management and risk register gets further sort of matured and developed, we can take assurance that other sources of assurance flow through into your strategic risk register.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? Councillor Wells?
Thank you, Chair. It's really more a question for Suzanne, really, I guess. This plan looks very comprehensive and very thorough and probably covers everything one could think of, but assuming that we recruit to an internal audit team who are fully working and no issues with performance and all the rest of it, we've got a team of full capacity, how close can we actually get to delivering all of this with the internal team, do you think?
Well, that's clearly something I will have conversations with Dan about, because I want to take some advice in terms of what is the right size team and where we need to be. So I haven't had the full conversation with my colleague statutory officers yet about exactly when we go to recruit, what we look like. Perhaps we'll come to that more in a latter item at the end of the agenda. But I have confidence that we have support for the immediate future that will get us moving back to where we need to be. And how we resource that will be a conversation for during the course of the new financial year.
Anyone else? Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is a really strong start in terms of getting a long list together, and I suppose I will use my intervention / question to just put a couple of pleas down, really. We have an item on here around capital expenditure. We don't refer to section 106 or SIL. We have very significant sums of money sitting in those at the moment. One of the things that we need to keep a very close eye on with local government reorganisation is making sure that Huntingdonshire's money gets spent in Huntingdonshire. We do not have St Neots will remember this story extremely well from 1974. So one of the things that I would like us to see in there is, what's the programme for this? Because I've watched this over the years and it drifts very badly in my view. So keeping an eye on how we're spending that money and that money is going to where it needs to be, I think is something that is very important for the people that we represent. I will agree that there's a very comprehensive list here. I will let you go away and work out what you think the priorities are in here. If I can put a plea in for the day job, I notice insurance has been raised here by the internal audits team themselves. I think we could go wider with regards to just not looking at it about the insurance of council-owned properties. It's talking about the tendering of insurance services, and particularly with cyber being one of our very greatest risks here. I think it'd be very interesting to see what protections we think could be out there, what protections we have, because financially, this is one of the ways that we mitigate our risks, probably one of the most powerful ways that we can mitigate the risks that we've got out there. I think it's been very many years since we've had an internal audit review of insurance in this organisation.
Happy to take those points back. Whether the programme for SIL spend is a matter for the internal audit programme or matter to bring something back in a different form, whether it's to this committee or through scrutiny or another committee, I'm happy to take that away and talk to my colleague corporate directors and to Dan about where the assurance is. But we have just recently had the peer review focused on the planning service, and they have had a look at SIL. We haven't had the report yet. So that will obviously come as part of the peer review. So you'll see some evidence in there. But your point is well noted, and I will take that back.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments on this item? Nope. Lovely. So the committee is recommended to note the approach being adopted for 25-26 and offer any areas which the committee considers that RSM should consider as part of the plan, which we've done. So let's move on to item 9, outstanding internal audit actions. This is to you again, Suzanne. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, through you. At the last meeting, because the plan came to you and there hadn't been any action taken, I undertook to take this away and talk to my colleagues in senior leadership team and show some progress. So this report here has set out the actions that senior leadership team is proposing to deal with these overdue actions, whether that's to redate them or a view that there is evidence to suggest that they have moved on. And also somewhere the suggestion is still work to do and proposed redating, a revised target date. This is not a done deal, as it were. This is the work that we've done to date. I have provided this to RSM, to Dan and his colleague Ali, for them to take a look at and then to consider how they can seek assurance that what we've said is reality and reasonable, not just something that management have gone, well, we want to move these on. And also as part of this, and we touched on it earlier, I was asked the direct question about the preparedness for the Procurement Act. And also, you'll be aware that's one of the outstanding audits where there were recommendations around that. So I have been, wearing my service director hat, having conversations with RSM and through the procurement lead that we recruited, and also we have increased the resource in that team, and we were let down by one individual who accepted the role and then 2 days before they were due to join us, withdrew their acceptance of that role. So I'm completing interviews this week to fill the 4th post in there, because that recognises we've got some contract management work. So the Appendix 2 is the summary of the work that's been done to date, and again, the plan in order to move that forward. And I can give you assurance that the procurement lead has already started to look at the register, has already engaged with a number of stakeholders who do a lot of procurement, delivered several elements of training to those managers, and has proposals to continue to roll that up to get us up to speed as quickly as we can. So I bring this to you to demonstrate the work that's been done and the areas that we will be engaging with internal audit on to see whether or not the proposed for either closure, redating or alternative work is reasonable. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I think it's clear that a great deal of work's gone into this, so thank you. Are there any questions or comments relating to it? Councillor Gray?
I have just one on item 1712. So firstly, thank you about the procurement and the readiness for that, much appreciated. But 1712, so I'm going to slightly cheekily kind of get at a point that I should have raised earlier on here regarding risks and risk management. We discussed last time, Suzanne, in this panel, a question, I'm clearly not animated enough over here, around risk events and the reporting of risk events and the recording of them, and how we would get sight of that. And I notice in here it's got key actions controls, risk appetite breaches, those kind of things in there. So as you develop your new framework, will you be able to assure us that you will provide us with some view of that going forward? Because up until now we haven't had a good view of that, in my view.
My intention as the senior officer responsible for that, is that the first thing we'll do is show you the corporate risk register, the actions that are being taken, and we'll bring that as formed as it is to the next meeting. What I would expect to do, and what I've done historically, is then to provide a report to the committee on a regular basis, whether it's every meeting or once a quarter, to show where those actions have moved, because some will inevitably move, any new ones that have been added, any ones that are proposed for, as I would regard them, retirement. One never deletes anything from a risk register in my view. They might have either expired because they might relate to an event that's happened, no risk transpired, and therefore one would retire them. So it is my intention to bring you that report on a regular basis and for you to see the corporate risk register at each relevant meeting, whatever frequency we decide collectively, because that's your choice as the committee, showing you the new ones that have been added, how things have moved and changed. We might consider, and I'll bring this back as a proposal, whether you would like on a regular basis to have a directorate review, so each of the directors come and talk through the risks relevant to their directorate, or whether you would like to take a theme and have a more in-depth review of each of those risks. And that's how I would propose to give you assurance that we are both keeping the risk dynamic, because it should be dynamic, and that would enable you then to have some detailed conversation with risk owners. So that would be my proposition. I'll bring you more of that back at the next meeting.
Go for it.
May I just follow up on that then? So if I gave you a hypothetical example that somebody accidentally emailed a whole load of data that belonged to sort of personal data belonging to residents somewhere where they shouldn't have done, clearly that's a corporate risk. That's a risk event. It's happened. How do we get sight of the adequacy of the reporting across the organisation into your office about, whether it's slips and trips, stuff that goes on at leisure centres or out on the bin rounds, or the example that I've just given you? How do we get visibility that those are being reported to you, and comfort that we're learning lessons from those mistakes? Because I don't think this panel has ever really been shown that activity taking place. I'm not saying it doesn't take place. I'm saying there's been no evidence, I think, that I've seen brought through to this panel. And I think, given that we're here to, verify that you're doing what you say you're doing, we ought to have some visibility of that kind of activity as well.
Having looked at the rhythm of reports that come here, I believe that the Data Protection Officer also provides an annual report to you. If there was a significant and serious breach, I would expect both to liaise with internal audit and potentially external audit if that was the case. In terms of checking how those risk events are being managed, I think we've already proposed on next year's internal audit plan that they'll look at the process of risk management. And I think I'd like to take some time to look at how that works. Obviously, I'm still relatively new, 3 months in, but your point is well made. You need assurance that that mechanism is working rather than to see the individual risk events. And that's something I'll build into the process while working with RSM, and both in the capacity as helping me with risk, but also how we build that in through the internal audit plan so that you can be given some assurance that actually those things are happening. I can give you that assurance around health and safety. That's one of the functions that sits within my directorate, and I do know that that is escalated up and actions are taken and lessons are learnt, but we can look to how we can build that in to give you that assurance.
Any other questions or comments? I potentially have one. My only reservation on this item is perhaps the removal of the Section 106 agreements, item number 1659. It states that the SIL governance review is being carried out and is being implemented, but we haven't had sight of this review. I was wondering if perhaps we may get sight of it or be available in a future meeting.
Two things to note there, Chair. That was a historic review, perhaps before you were on the committee, that was actually carried out. However, as part of the peer review that I mentioned earlier of the planning service, SIL was looked at, and that review hasn't yet come to us. And this committee saw sight of both the full corporate peer challenge and the peer challenge that was carried out on audit and governance. So I would expect that to come into the council domain in due course. We haven't yet had that. But as I say in the report, that's our recommendation. We've already talked about SIL as well, and that's something that that's our SLT recommendation. Audit have not said that they're satisfied with that yet. So that's still for discussion. And I'm sure Dan has heard that as the head of internal audit.
Okay, thank you. I think that was perhaps me getting an internal review mixed with a peer review, perhaps. Any more questions? No. Thank you. So the committee is recommended to discuss and comment on the actions recommended by SLT, which we've done. So let's move on to item 10, the Corporate Governance Committee Progress Report. Suzanne, you get a breather, and Habs, I believe you're in charge of this
Yep.
one.
Thank you very much, Chair. You have the report before you. The first two items we'll pick up in the closed session, and then that leaves us with the Constitution Review Working Group, the next meeting of which is on the 6th of February. So if there's any questions, happy to take them.
Any questions? No? Oh, Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, sorry, the Constitution Review Working Group, in light of what we've been discussing, the changes that are forthcoming, is it worth continuing this Constitution Review? Because the Constitution is going to be null and void after we're taken or we amalgamate with other councils.
Through you, Chair, that's actually a conversation we will be having at the next meeting, and certainly Lisa, myself and the Chief Executive conclude that there are some things that do need amending because we'll be here for at least 2 years, and that may reprioritise the way in which we look at some of the work of the Constitutional Review Group. Let me give you an example. We do need to update our Code of Procurement, and we need that now because of the change of the Act, so something like that we will do because it's important to do. So it's likely to reprioritise the work that we do on the Constitution rather than take it away. But your point is noted, we have considered it.
Thank you. Councillor Hodgson-Jones.
Thank you. Just to follow up on Councillor Taylor's comment, there is an important aspect, is that whatever happens to Huntingdonshire District Council, there will still be a council for this area. And the likelihood is that most of Huntingdonshire District Council will be merged into that new authority. And therefore, the better our constitution is and the better our systems are, the more chance there is of that being the basis on which the new authority operates, rather than having somebody else's framework come into place. So there is merit in the Constitutional Working Group pursuing and getting the best constitutional structure in place for Huntingdon, even if it's only for part of the new authority when it eventually emerges.
Fair point. Thank you. Anybody else? No, thank you. So we'll move on to item 11, which is exclusion of the press and public. Our final item on the agenda, item 12, will be discussed in private. Members, can we formally exclude the public from the meeting? And I'll read out the wording on the agenda. To resolve that the press and public be excluded from the meeting because the business to be transacted contains information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information.